Wonderful. So I'm about to hit focus mode. And basically, guys, if you have a question or anything that comes to mind as we're talking, chuck it in the chat, and we're going to have some time towards the end after we've talked for a while to address those questions. So it'd be great to hear what questions you guys have. I'm sure you have plenty of questions for Danny. I'm really excited to pick Danny's brain today as well to find out more about her experience.
Okay, definitely. So, when I was little, I loved storytelling. It just called my heart, and it was such a passion for me. And so, as I turned into a teenager, I learned about storytelling through video. And so, I started creating all of these videos, created for one of my birthday parties, all of my friends got the chance to become part of a thriller. So I had a person dressed up as an alien because, it makes sense. And then I had some other friends that, were the victims. And it was very cheesy, being a kid, not really thinking of, oh, wait, you need to take the cap off of the lid if you're giving this poison. Oh, wait, maybe don't talk when you hear a lawnmower in the background. Like just all of these little things. But this is like the beginning of my storytelling. And then I was on a bunch of podcasts and learned about speaking. And then I learned about storytelling on books. And this is what I felt my true passion was. And so now I'm writing books, did an international bestseller, working on a fantasy trilogy book series as of now. So that's me in a nutshell.
Amazing. Yeah, super interesting. So I'm curious, you said you're like a best-selling, what's the name of your book, if you don't mind sharing? And was it also a fantasy book, fantasy series?
So, this is my book, The Wandering Heart, A Tale of a Misfit Traveling in Life's Wilderness. And this book is loosely based on my traumatic brain injury I had 11 years ago. And so I created a book about it because this is what I talked on all these podcasts about. I really was passionate about showing people that there's another side to being broken. You can get yourself healed, you can get to somewhere else. It doesn't have to be all about you being stuck in the pain. And so I created this book.
Wonderful, beautiful. It sounds like an amazing story. So yeah, thanks for sharing that with us. I want to dive into this very first question. We've got a great question here. In terms of, I've just shared the list in the chat in terms of questions that we're basically going to loosely follow if we're disciplined today. So the first question was around why is storytelling useful for getting your story out as opposed to just explaining it? Would love to hear your perspectives, and I'm going to share my 2 cents because I won't be able to not share my perspective on this. So, what are your thoughts, Danny? Why is storytelling useful for getting your message out and your story out?
This is such a good one. And we have to think of how people learn. Everyone learns in a different way. Some people are auditory, kinetic, some people are more visual. And so when you use storytelling, that brings another layer of learning. And if you just think of many of those books out there, the ones that usually touch us the most are the ones that we connect with. And it means that they have some kind of storytelling within it. So, for instance, maybe you're reading a book about potatoes, and that would be very dry, crappy book if the author didn't intertwine its own personal story within it. And then you're like, oh my gosh, they survived off of potatoes for years. What some hardships they went through, or whatever it may be. So that's why storytelling is so useful because it's something that helps us connect with others.
Yeah, absolutely. When I get asked this question, or usually when I'm not usually asked, I'm usually just convincing people why storytelling is important. And I like to talk about the historical relevance of storytelling and the idea that we as humans learned through story for tens of thousands of years, right? It's like how we absorbed information. And so I fundamentally believe that we're very well primed to absorb information this way. It's more engaging, it's more memorable, just as you mentioned. And so, not everyone will resonate with stories, but I think the vast majority of people find it easier to listen to and easier to absorb information. And yeah, very much aligned in that way. Um, nice one. How I want to ask, yeah, in terms of like getting your message out and your story out, from the writer's perspective, what is it like as a writer needing to, I guess, speak and use storytelling in spoken form, to perhaps tell your own story or to even, promote the book that you wrote. What is that like? Could you maybe share some thoughts on that?
Yeah, so when it comes to the written form, I think it's very vital to use our senses. So this is like you're painting a whole picture for this person that's reading your book. So this could be with your feelings, your emotions. This could be with descriptions of the place, how it felt there. All of these parts are important when you're writing the scene or writing your story, because then that person feels more there. They feel like they're a part of this story they're reading because they get to feel the feelings, the emotions. They understand how a certain place is, all of these kinds of things just from the reading.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. In the storytelling framework that I teach, I basically talk about four key components. And I built that actually from just absorbing other people's storytelling frameworks and trying to find something that worked really well, originally for advanced non-native English speakers, because I wanted something that was easy to grasp and could be able to take a personal experience in and transform it into a story. And one of those is obviously the senses. So just like this idea of being able to, once an action is followed, I walk into the room and then link it to the senses, like action, sense, action, sense. I found that just to be a really simple framework, and it just shifts what a story feels like and sounds like. I also found that some of these elements, they just help to create images in my mind. I don't know if everyone else's mind works that ways, but yeah, when you hear someone saying, like my heart was pumping, I could see, I could see the people in the room, they're all shuffling around, and when we draw attention to the senses, I get these images that pop up into my mind, which just makes it so easy for me to follow along. So, yeah, it's beautiful, and that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Curious. So let's see. Let's dive into some of these questions here. What makes a story stick? So I think we're kind of touching on this now in terms of, different elements or components. What makes a story stick with an audience, and how does that differ between written and the spoken stage? Yeah. So what's the difference between these two formats?
Uh, so let's see. When we think of writing a book, you're getting so much more emotion on the page. You're using the words to tell the story in a different way. Versus when it comes to spoken stage, you're using the visual cues, you're using your whole body. When you're writing a book, you don't have that. All you have are the words. And if they do the audiobook, then they also get to hear the audio for it. So that can be helpful in another way. But yeah, the huge difference is the visual, I guess. Because spoken stage, as you know, they see you. You get to be the person, the thing that is giving the message, the story, whatever it is. You're the one sharing it. When it comes to a piece of paper or a book, it's however they see it in their own mind. They get to make the visual themselves. So I guess that's the biggest part of it. And then what makes a story stick with an audience, I think this all comes down to how you use the words. Like, for instance, the voice that you have behind what you're talking about. There are books out there that seem very dry and they're just more factual, and they forget to have the inner story in there. So there's the outer story and then there's the inner story. And the outer story is more like logistics, the facts. The inner story is like what's going on within. And that's something that you can get with storytelling through books.
Yeah, interesting. Interesting. I was thinking about how when I work with clients on storytelling, one of the very common things that I see is that people tend to, and I did this as well, we tend to focus way too much on the context and the background information. And I think part of that often comes from maybe this idea that to be a good storyteller, we need to be really descriptive. And that might be something that we see in written forms, which works brilliantly, right? Like you could have a page or two that describes this thing in detail. But in spoken storytelling, if you do that, you might lose your audience if you do that for too long. Depends on the story, of course. So there's a need to really like move things along and get to the meat of your story and ignore some of the background details. So it's about selecting what information is most relevant to this story. What's the thing that I really need to focus on? And that takes time and practice and rhythm. Yeah. Um,
Yeah, and I love how you pointed that out too, because you know, there are a lot of people that they feel, oh, I can just read this from the book word for word. But then it's you're just regurgitating it and it doesn't feel real because when you're on a stage, when you're having conversation with someone, you're not talking like it's from a book. It sounds completely different. The words you use, all of it is so different. So, yeah, that's another thing that's so different when it comes to the written form versus being on a stage.
Yeah, that's a great point. So let's dig into that a little bit. So besides the descriptive language, is there anything else that stands out to you in terms of what is different between the written and spoken formats? And I ask you this because I consider that I know that you've spoken on stages and you're pretty active in that way. You're also a writer. So yeah, just want to curious about your perspective there.
Yeah, I guess I would have to say that like as you had mentioned about the descriptive words, there's also the point of when you're on a stage, you have so much more that you can use besides the words that you say. So it's all about your body, how you use your voice, so going up and down, pauses, like all of those things. So when it comes to the written form, you're you don't get those things. So you work with what you have, the dreaded writer's block. So, yeah, when it comes to the book, let's see. There are times when I may have more factual things in there and I give more data, and I'm not always going to say that on a stage. I may reference it, but I'm not going to go into further detail. Whereas in a book, I might have a little bit more details for them. And books sometimes have an appendix. They have ways, resources, references, sites, all of these extra things that you don't have when you're on a stage. You might just reference them here or there, but it's not the same as having a book. And the other thing about a book is it's it's hard to do the same thing on a stage when it comes to writing a book. I mean, they're both great forms and I love them together because that's where the magic happens. But they also both have their own places. You can't just regurgitate what I say on stage and just put it on the paper. It needs to have more data or more description or extra to add to it. So I guess that's the biggest difference.
This is a really great reminder to me in terms of how every format of communication is different. So, we're talking about speaking versus writing. These are two very clearly different formats. But even as simple as something I've talked about a little bit recently, the difference between creating videos for Instagram versus creating videos for your school community. It's a different format, even though it's still a video, it's a different audience, different style, and we have to be conscious of those. And in terms of many of the public speaking types of categories, podcast, interview, speech, pitch, all this, they all need slightly different things. Yeah, a different focus. So I realize that it is very much that maybe writing and speaking is just more on the extreme ends of that. Yeah, very, very interesting. Mm. What's the biggest mistake people make when translating their written stories into spoken presentations or translating their spoken presentations into written stories? And maybe actually one precursor question I want to ask to this is, do you think that writing makes you a better speaker and that speaking makes you a better writer, especially in regards to storytelling? What are your thoughts?
Well, when you say it like that, I think it depends on the person because I have met some people that they do really well at having a script. And there are some people that read their script word for word. But writing a script is still different than writing a book. So it's like you're writing a script specifically to speak it. I've also met people, and I'm similar to that, where I write a loosely based script. So it's like I just hit the points of what I want to talk about, and then I build from those. So that is very helpful for me. And I think personally, for me, writing scripts and doing it in that way, I don't feel that it has helped me with the writing part perspective just because my written form of books is completely different than me speaking on a stage.
Mhm.
If they were more similar in certain ways, like for instance, if I was writing a self-help book, then they'd probably be a little more similar. But since I'm not that kind of writer, it doesn't work because the books that I'm working on right now are fantasy series books. So it's like the words that I'm using, what's happening, it doesn't really happen in real life, some of those things, and it just doesn't work well together in that sense.
Yeah.
But I know that there are a few people that I've met that have said that since they have started writing their book, it helped them with the speaking on stage because they were able to take pieces or paragraphs or something from their book and talk about that specifically on stage or reference their book while they're talking on stage. I've met so many that do that. That's why I think it's vital for every person that is speaking on stage or writing a book to do both together because it helps you become even a better speaker or a writer or storyteller.
Mhm.
But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It does remind me of some of the clients that I've worked with where I noticed that there tends to be two types of people in terms of preparation, especially for impromptu speaking. There's one who does really well with thinking out loud and they need to talk to have their ideas generated and distilled. And so for them, speaking through it once or twice, they benefit greatly from speaking practice and preparation. Whereas there's another kind, another type where they really need to write things down in order to have that. Otherwise, they don't have a lot of substance to what they're sharing. And so the writing comes in there. And so, yeah, sometimes just as simple as just a couple of notes or something. I'm more like that. So I think I do sometimes think out loud, but I also benefit greatly from actually writing things down. And so for me, perhaps writing, don't know about stories, but definitely planning it out a little bit helps me to be able to execute really, really well or much better the first time. But it's interesting just to see that there are very different types or approaches to that, and not one thing works for everybody. So it is important if you are looking to improve your storytelling skills, you got to find some of the approaches that work for you. And it definitely depends on the context as well. Is it impromptu? Is it planned? Is it public speaking, etc.? Yeah. So very interesting.
Yeah.
What's one storytelling technique that works brilliantly in both writing and speaking that more people should know about? Interesting question.
What's one storytelling technique that works brilliantly in both writing and speaking? I think this is when you paint the picture for somebody. So when we talk about going back to the senses, this is something that sticks with a lot of people. When I think of people on stage, I think of a lot of those comedians, and they're so good at speaking on stage. They play all of different parts in it. Like if they're talking about their friend, they may go down in their structure, like they sink down, and then they may bring their voice up or low or something. So you get the feel that it's a different person. Now, when you come with the writing part of it, it's giving those feelings, the way that a person should feel in a certain situation. So for instance, let's say you're with your best friend, and this is what I'm saying would be in the book. And your best friend has that slithery feeling to him where he feels a little off and kind of two-faced. When you think of those kinds of words, it's starting to paint a picture for you. You're like, this friend maybe isn't the best kind of friend. He might be into doing things for himself, maybe would be a backstabber. These are the feelings you might get just from that little bit of context. Now, when it comes to speaking on a stage with that same thing, the person, the speaker, would play that out. So you'd get to see it instead of reading it. And so I think both of those ways would be truly helpful for someone and would be sticking in your mind. You'd be like, oh, yes, I remember that guy. He felt slithery to me, or I don't know about him when he was playing this part, or whatever it is.
Yeah. There's so much power in the precise words that we choose. Conciseness is a very big theme, I think, in our community at the moment, and also just with many of the people that I'm working with, and that ability to really convey a lot of ideas or feelings in just a few words, and that comes down to your choice of vocabulary. descriptive language can often be confused with more words, and that might be how we start that process at the beginning. But over time, yeah, there's huge value in being very concise and using specific language that can generate ideas and imagery and feelings, as you just described there. Slithering. Yeah. I think of who's that guy from Harry Potter? Malfoy. That's who comes to mind for me. Yeah, so that's brilliant.
Yeah, that's a good one to imagine for that part, for sure. And I love how you said that when it comes to descriptions, we sometimes over-explain, or when we think of something descriptive, getting so much into it. And that's something that happens with the written form too. So some of the books, it works well when you describe so much because it gives so much more context for the reader. But there are other books that it's better to leave a little bit more to their imagination. And it's good. You have to think of your reader when you're doing the writing. So, for instance, if you know your ideal reader is a person that wants to get down into it and maybe doesn't have the attention span to go into pages of details of description on what is happening in this era at this specific place at this specific time. So, it that makes a huge difference on the book.
Mm. Absolutely. Yeah. I want to ask you probably one more question, and then we're going to take off the focus mode and then just kind of gather everybody, take some of those questions that we're seeing in the DMs or in the not in the DMs in the chat. Yeah. I have this one question. I think this is a good question here. Yeah, but I want to ask you a different question, which is from the context of the Oracy Club and speaking communication. What would be a piece of advice that you would give to anyone that is looking to improve their storytelling skills without really knowing specifically how they tell stories or where they're at? Is there anything there that you feel is vital? And this might relate a little bit to the question we asked before, but what are your thoughts?
I guess I would have to say that when you're talking about storytelling, especially on stage, it's so good not to forget about our body. Our hand gestures, all of it, it plays a vital role for us to get out what we're wanting to get out there. So I learned, I can't remember who from, but I learned that when we're doing something online like this, that subconsciously we're thinking, ooh, is this person a threat? But then when you see their hands, you're more likely to believe them and listen to them and connect in some way. And so that's the same when it comes to speaking on a stage. If you see someone's hands behind their back the whole time, you might feel a little hesitant on fully understanding or listening to them. So I think it's important for us to realize that our body is also a tool when it comes to speaking.
I think it's interesting from the perspective of writing that if you spend a lot of time writing stories, then the one of the big advantages of speaking obviously is all the body language, right? And the facial expressions and all that stuff you can do. So I see that as like the speaking superpower. And for us speakers looking at written forms of storytelling, it's probably the fact that it doesn't have to be live and that you can think about it and it's a different you take time to think about how you craft it, and it's a little bit different that way. So the more static nature of storytelling. So yeah, it's an interesting perspective. Yeah.
When it comes to the storytelling, when it comes to the book, that's where there's so many layers to it. So it's not like you just write the book and it's done. Oh, no, 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 no. There's loads of things you're supposed to do beforehand. So, like where I had mentioned your ideal reader, it's good to think of that person and have that pictured out. This is the person that's going to help you guide you on the whole writing process and like the structure of the book. Because writing a book is more than just writing. You need to have some kind of outline, some kind of structure. You need to understand your ideal readers. So there's so many parts of it. And something that I tell all of my members is think of what your heart wants. Think with your heart, not your head. Especially when it comes to the written form. This is where you just let it flow out of you and onto the paper because if you get stuck caught up in your head, you're going to have all these blocks coming up. Oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not a writer. Oh, I don't have any degree in this. Oh, my stuff is crap. All of this stuff happens because we listen to our head. But if you let your heart come out, this is where I call it word vomit. You just let it flow out of you and get it out.
Mm. something that comes up a lot for me in terms of when I first start working with people in storytelling is that I'll say, okay, tell me a story. Let's just see where your baseline is. And they will often say, like, I don't have any stories. I don't have anything interesting to, to share or whatever. And I feel like that perspective is very, very common. But I mean, I believe storytelling is more of a shape rather than an actual, especially in terms of personal storytelling. It's more of a shape rather than actually the specific details of what happened. And sometimes we do have to fill in some of the details that we can't remember if we're telling a story from 20 years ago. But that's something that I found is I want everybody to consider and think about in terms of storytelling, whether it is written or it is spoken. If it's personal storytelling, your life is very rich in stories and narratives. You just have to find the right way to shape it so that the world can receive it. So,
Yeah. I think that's a great way to look at it as a shape instead of another way. And something that I like to tell my members and my clients is there's 8 billion people in the world. You can't tell me there's not one person that gives a damn with what you have to say. Like, so it's like, even if we feel that our story doesn't matter, oh, no one wants to hear it. And like you said, shaping it so that it sounds better, it looks nice, and all these things, that is vital to do. And it could be something simple as walking across the street, seeing a stranger, and giving them a smile. That makes their whole life. And that's just something simple. That's the same thing we can do with our stories.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I love it. I feel like that's a nice place to stop for the moment. We're going to continue with some questions, but Danny, thank you so much. I feel like I learned a lot about the writer's perspective in terms of storytelling. And I think that's really important, seeing in the big picture of what storytelling is. So thank you so much for coming along today. Thanks for sharing your experiences. Danny is the founder of the Storyteller's Path. Is that correct? Yes, the community on School. And there'll be some links around. You can find that if you're interested in learning more about storytelling. Danny, is there anything you want to mention there about your community?
Yeah, so my community is free to join. And in the community, we're all about supporting one another, helping each other with some of those problems. And then I have loads of guides and all kinds of stuff in there. And then if they want to do the level up with me, that's where I have my team and I to help guide you through the book as just an idea all the way to published.
Brilliant. Sounds fantastic. And for anyone
Mhm.
that's listening on the other side, maybe from Danny's community or elsewhere, my community, we focus on helping you bridge the gap. If you're a writer or you're just someone who's interested in personal storytelling, I have a bunch of resources and other things that can help you with that, whether you want to work with me or just bash your way through a course. There's plenty of stuff inside Oracy Club to help you with that. So wonderful. Let me unfocus the mode. There we go. All right.